What's up everybody? Today we are deploying a Next.js application on a custom server. There are a few benefits to self-hosting a Next.js application. It provides more flexibility and customization. Additionally, you can get more bandwidth depending on your provider of VPS and what their pricing is like. In this video, I'll use a server from Hostinger, although if you already have a server, you can still follow along a tutorial. You're just going to need an IP address and root credentials, so basically root access. The reason I picked Hostinger is because they offer scalable resources, and as your app grows, it can handle easily increase in your traffic. Plus, they have a user-friendly firewall configuration. Before we start configuring the VPS, I'm going to run over the steps in using this diagram to explain over high level what we are going to be doing. So you have a code for your website that you want to make it accessible to the world. You want a user to be able to type in the domain in the browser and be able to see it. So the way you get this code onto a server, first thing, as I mentioned, we're going to need that root credentials. So you have your address, your username, your password. So we SSH into the server. Then inside server, we're going to take the code and put it on the GitHub. And then we're going to do git clone. So we pull down that code, and now that code lives on the server. Then to be able to run the code, we're going to install dependencies, for example, Node.js, npm. And Next.js can be deployed to any hosting provider that supports Node.js. So once we have all the dependencies, we can run the application, and application would be accessible using your IP address, but because Next.js applications, as you already run on your local, they run on port 3000, right? So this would be the address of your IP and server, but and even if you configure the domain, point the domain, let's say if you have www.yourdomain.com, we don't want this to be available on port 3000, we just want it to be open on by the address. So what do? We reverse proxy using Nginx. So we take the local host and we point it to the IP address, and that's pretty much it. There are a few more. We're gonna go into details once we actually set up, and then you can also, which would not be part of the tutorial, is configure a domain name instead of the IP address. But once your code is up, if somebody types in your address into the browser, they'll be able to see your website. Now, I know if it's your first time doing this way deployment, it might look a little bit overwhelming, but in reality, you just have to run a few commands in the terminal, and also on the way you can check if I'll also show the commands where you can check if there is an issue, if the status of everything is okay, and how to test that out. So working with terminal is also easy. And let's get started. First, let's get that server, and I'm on Hostinger's plans. And here I want to thank Hostinger for sponsoring this video. And if you use my code WebDecoded, you can get additional 10% off. So once you pick the plan and the duration, I use KeyVM second. You type in the code, or you go to the link in the description of this video, and the discount would be applied. Then you choose the payment method and proceed with getting the plan. Then we are presented with this screen where we click Start Now, and you select location that's closer to you because it depends for the speed. And then we select OS with control panel. That's going to help us better manage our server. So that would be our operating system. The next step would be choosing either between, we're going to go with Ubuntu, I hope I pronounced that right, and no for the malware scanner. Then you enter a password for your panel. That is when you log in using admin. Here on this page, you can add SSH key if you want and pick a password. So that's the details. We finish setup. It will take a minute to create. And let's go to the dashboard. We have few details here: IP address, and we're gonna copy that. We're gonna go to the terminal and type in SSH root at your IP address. Then it's gonna ask you if you trust it. You proceed with yes. And next step would be to enter the password that you created when setting up it was on the second step. Once it authenticates, we get this message, welcome to Cloud Panel. Now on a Hostinger, usually the Git is installed, but you can check if you have a different provider, git -- version, and if it shows version, then it's there. If not, run sudo apt install git, and that's gonna install Git on your server. Now as a next step, let's grab the code. I have that deployed on GitHub. It's public. Make sure you select HTTPS. This is code for a tutorial that I did about Next.js portfolio, and if you're curious about that, you can also check by going at the top right corner of the video. You're going to be presented with the link to the tutorial. But if you just create a new app using Next.js Create App or your own Next.js app, you can upload that to GitHub. After we grab the GitHub URL, we just double check if Node or npm are installed by Node dash version, and they are not, so we can install them. First, I'm gonna copy this command that should install the node, and then we have to run the file that sets up the node. So that's going to be sudo bash and then this node source file name, and I'm gonna paste that here and keep my sticky notes float on top. So let's go ahead, paste that in. It's gonna continue, just wait for a minute, don't press anything, it would install by itself. And once that is ready, we can now install also another run this command that it's telling us. So let's do get node.js. Now if we run node version name, then we would get that we'll double check that it's successfully installed, and let's do the same for npm, and it's there. Now we're ready to clone our repository. Let's run git clone and the URL of the repository. It saved it into this name, so let's cd into Next.js portfolio is the name of my repository, and inside here we're just gonna start adding these dependencies that Next.js your application requires, and we do that by running npm install. That would install all the dependencies listed in your package.json file. Let's give that a minute as well, and once it is ready, we can test it out. We can run the app by, as you would do on your local, by npm run dev. Now if we go npm run dev, it will start the server and it shows port 3000. That's where it's going to be. And you can open up the browser, you can paste your IP address followed by :and 3000, that is the port number. And I'm going to reload the page just in case. We can see in the terminal it gets reloaded, recompiled, and yep, it's running. That is our public address where everyone can see the application. If you don't see your app running on port 3000, it might be that your server firewall configuration is blocking it. So check UFW status. It will show you the connections it's allowing from all the ports, and you can also add 3000 in there by going UFW allow 3000, and then it is going to add the rule, and you once again run the application and see if it's coming up now. Now let's stop the development server and create a production version with the command npm run build. Now if I try to do that, because I'm using an API and environment variables in my .env file, it's gonna fail because I am using an API that contains some sensitive information which I saved in .env file that I have not pushed to GitHub. And if you don't have that kind of situation, if you don't have .env information in .env file, then you can skip that step. But if not, this is what we're going to do. Inside our project folder, we're going to create that file. So sudo nano.env.local. This is going to create the file and open the editor where we can paste our API key, so basically just copy the env file, and then we can save it and exit it out by Ctrl X, and then press enter for save it into env local. So now the file is there. If we run again npm run build, it would be successful because it would pick up those API keys from that file. And once the build is done, we can start the server by npm run start. That would start our production, like build version. Now, if for some reason my terminal quits or I decide to stop running this, then application won't be available anymore, and we don't want that. We want it to be running, and that's where pm2 comes in. Let's install it with this sudo npm install g and then pm2 latest command, and it will help us run in a way that the application stays up. Next thing we're gonna do is run this purge Apache command. Apache is HTTP server, and purge basically removes it from our server and any configuration files because we're installing ngx and we don't want it to kind of get in the way. So let's install ngx with the install command shown on the screen, and then we're going to check status of it with this command. Now if we look at active, it says it's inactive because we haven't started it. So let's quit that by pressing Q, and let's run start command. Now if we check status once again, it's gonna say that it's active and it's running. So we installed Nginx, but now we have to configure it, and we can do that. First, make sure you're outside of your project folder, just cd and then use this squiggly, it will take you back. And in here we're gonna go into Nginx folder, and there's a sites available folder where we might see an Nginx default configuration, but we want to set up our own. So cd etc Nginx sites available. Let's go in that folder, and here we are going to create a file for our configuration, and we can do that by running sudo tag and then the name of the file. Nginx file configuration files, you can name it whatever you want besides Nginx. I think that's the name of the default file. And then the extension that it ends with is .conf for configuration. So let's press enter on that, and yeah, I'm gonna name it Next app. And let's continue. Then we're gonna use a nano to open the file and edit it. So sudo nano, once again, name of the file, that would take us here, where we're gonna paste this configuration. And what it does is that it sets up the reverse proxy from the localhost 3000 to our IP address. So only thing you have to change here is next to the server name, you either paste your IP address, or you have a URL, you paste the URL. Let's say it's like index.com, you do index.com and then space www.index.com. So that way your domain name would also point to this, our application that's running on this port. And after that, we can save the changes and exit out. So hit Control X and then save it, yes, and the name, press enter. That would be the name. Now one more thing we have to do. First, we can check if the syntax is okay for the configuration, and that would be the command sudo nginx -t. So that runs this nginx configuration file, the main one, and then it would check its syntax. So now what we need to do is we need to make sure that main configuration file has a reference to the configuration file that we just created, and we can do that by linking. So we're going to take the file sudo lns and then the path of our new file. So I'm gonna remove, I think, the last ls, and then instead of sites available your url.com, you just change it to your file configuration name, in my case next tab config. So then we're gonna take folder sites enable, and then we're gonna link it to that folder because that's where the nginx configuration has a reference to. So I changed the name and I think everything else looks good. Let's press enter, and one more time let's run the syntax check to make sure now it should be picked up from Nginx configuration file, and it looks good. So I have a conflicting server name because I created 2 configuration files, one before the tutorial, so I'm going to remove that, but regardless it should work and it should be linked now to our port, to our IP. And what we do is after that we start this restart, so sudo service nginx restart. When you change the configuration you have to restart the server, and we go to our IP address. What we'll see is this nginx notice because we are not running our application currently, so this is expected. We just started nginx, and like I mentioned, what's going to help us run our application without us, because like I mentioned, what's going to help us run our application Next.js inside from start the application from Next.js is PM2. So let's go get out of this sites available folder, and we're gonna going back into our application Next.js portfolio. And in here we can start a PM2 process, so that would be PM2 start npm, and we're gonna give it a name. Let's do next app -- and start. So these are my other processes that I was testing out, and this is the new one that we have. Status is online, and if we do PM2 start, it will tell us that this ecosystem config.js file is not found, and current so to save that, it also gave us warning here that it's not synchronized with the save list, and because I made changes, so let's make those changes first. Actually, instead of start, let's do start up, and once again I'm going to save this, and it initiated the configuration file. So next time it's not going to throw the error that we don't have the configuration file. And then let's save this list once again. And one more thing is that if you do get this status errored when running PM2, what helped me is deleting node modules, reinstalling, and running the build, because in my case when I opened the logs I was missing the build. So now you can see for this process that I'm running, it is saying online, and you can always check what processes are running by running this command PM2 list. If you go to the IP address net right now, I have this another starter app that I installed, and it is up and running and everybody can access it from this IP address. So I'm gonna do switch it to the other one, but whichever one is running you should be able to see it. So cd next.js.portfolio is the one that I installed from GitHub, and I'm gonna run here build one more time, npm run build. It's just gonna generate the build folder that PM2 later on needs it to run. And I did already create a process for this one. I think the last that I named it next app. So once this is created, let's do, so I'm gonna first stop the other processes, so PM2 stop all, and then PM2 start, and then the process name that I want to start. We're gonna refresh this, check that it's working, perfect, and then I'm gonna save this configuration, so when server reboots we always have this. So that is it for tutorial. Now your Next.js application is up and running on the server, and it is accessible with the IP address. You can also configure domain name, and there's a few other things that you can do in case, for example, you make your GitHub repository private. You can set up different users to access it. You don't have to access from the root users, and from HTTP you can also configure for it to use HTTPS. For that you would need SSL certificate. And let me know if you're interested in these topics and how did you find this tutorial. I'll see you in the next video.